We turn now to the newly elected chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is in Fort Lauderdale. Good morning.
Good morning, Harry.
So you heard what Congressman Cantor said about the Democratic response to this victory in New York 26. He called it demagoguery. Would you classify it as demagoguery?
Well, coming from the majority leader who was part of the architect of the 2010 elections, focusing on scaring seniors about what Democrats were doing with Medicare, he would know. What we're doing is making sure that we can prevent the Republicans from ending Medicare as we know it. And that's what Kathy Hochul ran on leading up to her victory this Tuesday in New York 26. We need to make sure that we continue to reform Medicare in the way that Democrats have done under the Affordable Care Act, Harry. The trustees this week for Medicare said that we actually saved in the Affordable Care Act. We reduced costs in Medicare by 26%. Mm-hmm. We made sure that we added 8 years of solvency in the Affordable Care Act to Medicare and gave us some room to sit down at the table like Eric Cantor has been with the Vice President to really negotiate some long-term reform.
But the trustees also said just, a couple of Fridays ago that this thing could be insolvent in the next decade. Doesn't something really dramatic have to happen? And as the congressman suggested, the Republicans have a plan. Do the Democrats have a plan?
Like I said, the Republicans have a plan to end Medicare as we know it. What they would do is they would take the people who are younger than 55 years old today and tell them, you know what, you're on your own. Go and find private health insurance in the healthcare insurance market. We're going to throw you to the wolves and allow insurance companies to deny you coverage and drop you for pre-existing conditions. We're going to give you X amount of dollars and you figure it out. And these are people who have paid for their whole life into the system, are counting on that safety net. Americans sent a very strong message, not just in New York this week, but in Jacksonville, Florida last week when they elected a Democratic mayor for the first time in 20 years. In a state house race in New Hampshire, same issue. Americans support Medicare and the structure that we have for Medicare. Mm-hmm. They want us to sit down together and work on some long-term reform, which is what the Republicans and Democrats are doing with Vice President Biden right now.
All right. Well,
that's the direction we need to go.
One of your colleagues has suggested that Medicare puts the House back in play in 2012. Would you go as far as to agree with that?
Well, I think American voters are making it clear that they have seen a preview of what the Republicans would do to Medicare due to the direction that this country would go, and that they're rejecting it. They're saying they don't like it. And so if Republican candidates cling, as my Republican colleagues in the House have, to the Ryan plan to end Medicare, to focusing on tax cuts for the wealthiest and insisting on that, and balancing all the pain that that they're imposing on middle class and working families, then I think that Democratic candidates for Congress and President Obama and other Democrats up and down the ballot are going to find some success.
Do you think
what we need to do is sit down together and work on our nation's problems?
Do you think the Tea Party is losing some of its appeal?
I think Tea Party activists and Republican candidates elected to Congress by the Tea Party are finding that governing is hard. And that, it's easy to throw bombs and to be incendiary, not so easy to sit down and actually govern. And what we need to try to do is what the president called for: sit down around the table and deal with our long-term issues and engage in shared sacrifice, Harry. We can't do what the Republicans want to do, which is pile all the pain in terms of the cuts we need to make to our long-term deficit problems on the backs of people who can least afford it and the middle class, and still preserve tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. Americans don't think that's fair, and they're sending that signal in elections.
Well, you've got this big new job now, and it's very interesting. This presidential election is going to be upon us before we know it. The Republican presidential field is starting to take shape a little bit. Who would you prefer they nominate?
Well, I mean, I'll leave who they nominate to the Republicans. We certainly expect that they will have a vigorous primary, and the eventual Republican nominee will be battle-tested, and we expect it to be a significant election like every presidential election is.
President's approval numbers have improved significantly in the last month or so, but if the unemployment numbers stay the same and the economy doesn't start catching fire, Is President Obama reelectable?
Well, I think that the president's approval numbers are improving because Americans like the direction that he's been taking this country. In my home state of Florida, just a couple of days ago,
his numbers on the economy still aren't good. They're quite bad, quite frankly.
Well, what Americans want us to do is focus on creating jobs and turning the economy around. They don't want us to focus on an extremely radical social agenda, which is what the Republicans have been proposing since they took the majority back in the House. They don't want us to engage in an imbalanced approach to dealing with our long-term deficit reduction needs. Both parties, Harry, have said, you know, we need about $4 trillion in deficit reduction. What we don't need to be doing, Americans have said, is doing that by slashing education, by slashing health care, by ending Medicare and hurting seniors. They want us to sit down together and take a balanced approach. And that's what we're pushing for. That's what President Obama has been pushing for. And Republicans seem to be pushing back against that. And Americans see it. I think that's reflective in the president's numbers.
Right. You heard Eric Cantor say just a couple of minutes ago, raising revenue is not going to be part of any package that they're going to agree with. Do you feel
at the
absolutely?
Same time, he was saying everything's on the table.
Well, do you absolutely feel that raising taxes has to be a part of getting this thing back in sync?
Like I said, I think both parties, under President Obama's leadership and the Republicans, have said, you know, about $4 trillion in deficit reduction is the right number. What we need to sit down and around a negotiating table and agree on is that there needs to be some shared sacrifice. You know, Democrats acknowledge under President Obama, you know, he said, look, there's things that we think are important that are going to need to be cut, but that we can't afford right now.
Congressman,
Republicans need to make the same sacrifices.
We have about 20 seconds left.
They don't seem to be willing to do that.
All right. We're going to leave it at that then. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the newly elected chairwoman of the Democratic Party, we thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Harry.
You bet.